Hello, this is a movie review of After Porn Ends 3. This is the third movie in a collection of documentaries that basically interviews former adult film stars and talks about like how they got into porn and what they're doing now, and mostly about whether or not they are affected, whether their lives are affected by their past of being in the adult industry. This one is directed by Brittany Andrews, who is an adult film star right now. So one thing that they do with this series is what they talk to several different stars, mostly women, a couple of guys, and in between those interviews they put little snippets of clips from current adult film stars to kind of give their perspective on the way things are. So when you watch these, most of it covers people who are more famous in like the 80s and 90s than recent ones, and you can definitely see the difference as far as how they look at the industry, and how, like, for most part, when in those ages, it was easier to keep anonymous. Now it's a lot harder because it's, once you do a scene, it can be everywhere very quickly. So for that part, you know, the newer girls have it hard as far as trying to keep their anonymity and working against those kind of stereotypes that people have. But also it's a lot easier now to create your own brand, and when you do that you have more control as a star over what you do, what kind of scenes you do, things like that. So there's pros and cons depending on which decade you're actually in the industry. But for these ones, for the most part, they were actually pretty positive. There's a couple of negatives, but nothing too scary, basically, that would chase people away from wanting to be in the industry. It's more of a curiosity as to what happens when you're done. Like, how does it affect your life? So, one interview, though, did stick out because it was kind of weird. Usually the format is they start with how they got into it. They talk a little bit about, you know, whether they liked it or not, the kind of money they made, how long they were in it, and then what made them decide to leave, and whether or not that's had an impact on their lives. That's usually the format they follow with each star. But for some reason, when they did one for Herschel Savage, he's a former male star, they didn't do that. They basically just talked to him for a bit. It was like they were just chit-chatting, and then, but he never talked about how he got into the industry, or why he left, or anything like that, or any stigma related to being in the industry. He never talked about any of that. So I'm not sure why they had that one in there. It was just, it stuck out like a sore thumb because it wasn't following the format, and you didn't really learn anything from it. So, and I've seen interviews with Herschel Savage before. He does have interesting things to say, so I'm not sure why they didn't do that in this documentary. So it starts with Prya, who's an East Indian. She got into modeling in her 20s, and she didn't actually start working in the adult industry until she was 29, which was interesting to see. And she was pretty big for a little while. She said that when she started out, she had issues because people didn't like that she was making those movies, because it's usually her women of her ethnicity weren't really in adult films, so it was kind of a rare thing, and I don't know why people had an issue with it, but they did for the first year, and then she said that once she got more comfortable, things got better. And then she was talking about how she had kids, so she wanted to stop, and that's pretty much it. Like, there's not too much into it. She started out stripping, and then it became modeling, and then it became adult industry. She doesn't really have too many regrets. Like, she was talking about mostly how she missed out on like the college experience and things like that. But other than that, she didn't really have really too many complaints. I think the biggest thing that happened was that first year, that kind of racism that happened with her being an East Indian adult film star, and for some reason that rubbed people the wrong way. And next, you have Luc Wylder and Alexandra Silk. They're a married couple who have been working in the adult industry for a long time. Luc Wylder, it basically started in doing more like S&M and bondage, and then it got to the point where he was just so good at it that people were requesting him and wanted to film what he was doing, so he did, and it just escalated from there. And he met Alexandra Silk. They got married, and they're still in the industry. They still make some movies, but they also have like a whole production company that they work with. One of the girls who had some negative things to say was Jenna Presley, and even then she didn't really have a lot of negative things to say. It was mostly that she wanted to get into it because she found it like glamorous and exciting. So that's how she got into the adult industry. But at the time, she basically just said that she wasn't comfortable with a lot of stuff that was going on. It wasn't her kind of thing, and she eventually realized that, got married, and found God. And there's some clips of her talking and things like that, and she really doesn't seem judgmental towards the adult industry, and neither does her husband. They actually seem pretty open-minded about it, and they just kind of put that behind them and said, they didn't fit, she didn't fit there, and now she's looking towards where she will fit in. And it was she doesn't seem to have gotten anything positive out of the experience of being in the adult industry, but it doesn't seem like it's overly negative either. And then there's Christy Canyon, who was a pretty huge star in the 80s and into the 90s, and she is also one that she is still in the industry. Like, she was doing radio podcasts and things like that. She's still doing them for, I believe it's Playboy TV now, or it's Vivid TV now, or Vivid Radio. I can't remember. But yeah, mostly she was just a rebellious kid. She wanted to get into the adult film industry for the money, and she liked it. So she's been doing it ever since. And she was pretty happy and positive, and she had some good jokes. She was a funny interview. And then there was Tera Patrick, and she also was a big star. She enrolled in modeling school when she was young, and then it got to the point where she started stripping, and then from there it got into the adult industry. And a lot of these women, they start their own companies, and I think that leads to them not having a lot of negative things to say about the adult industry, because one, they're still making money from it, so they don't want to say anything negative about a company, an industry where they're making money. But also, they have more control. When they start their own companies, they have more control over what they do and who they do it with and things like that. So I think that starting your own company really leads to a more positive experience, and having your own brand leads to a more positive experience in the industry. But Tera Patrick herself didn't have anything negative to say, and she's still You know, she said she still cams and stuff. She hasn't been doing films for a while, for years, but she still makes good money in the industry. Jenteal is one of the next ones who she was in college and her boyfriend basically encouraged her to be in the industry and she was all for it. She liked the adult industry too, the adult films that she's seen. She was a fan and she wanted to be part of it. So she did and started out girl girl, went to boy girl, and she quit when she got married and had kids, and she wanted to do something else. And that's basically it. There wasn't anything overly glamorous about it. She did have a lot of good things to say about Vivid, which is a company at the time, like it was a huge company, and they could afford to give contracts and let the girls choose who they work with and have more control over what they did. So I think that's part of it. A good experience too is working with a good company, having a contract with a good company. And the last one was Bonnie Run, and she was basically, as when she was 18, she had a lot of tattoos, and then that led to some modeling shows she did for horror and for car shows, and that led to modeling and then the adult industry, which she did really well at for a short period of time. She was, you know, at the point where she left, I think she was directing, and she had her own company. She still has her own company where they even make toys and stuff like that. So she did the same thing that a lot of the most successful ones do, is start their own company and start making their own decisions for themselves. She is one of the only ones I know of on this special that has returned to the adult industry and is now making scenes. During the special, it seemed like that wouldn't happen, but it did. So overall, it's an entertaining documentary. They didn't really have a lot of guys. I'm not sure why. Maybe they don't have enough to talk to, because the previous versions they didn't. It wasn't an exact split, but they definitely talked to more guys. Like in this one, they talked to one guy, but Luc Wylder, but only with his wife. So it was kind of like both of their story. And then Herschel Savage, like I mentioned earlier, he didn't really have a story. Like I'm sure he does, but they didn't ask him, and I'm not sure why that was skipped over. But maybe for time, because it just hits an hour and 30 minutes. So maybe they ran out of time, and that's something that I would actually like to see if they keep doing this documentary series, is interview less people and go more in depth to the ones that you talk to, because these aren't in depth at all. Like you learn a couple of snippets, but most of what you learn here you can get from their Wikipedia pages. And so for that, you know, it's nice to see it from their point of view and to hear their words. But yeah, it's nothing new. You're not getting new information that you couldn't get, like I said, from a Wikipedia page. But overall, it's a good, entertaining show. There's nothing interesting or different about the style, the direction. It's basically just, you know, point a camera at somebody sitting on a couch talking, and that's it. And you know, maybe ask them a few questions. We don't hear the questions, but we see them talking. There's some, they do talk to a lot of the current stars, which I mentioned earlier. Like they talk to Romy Rain, Abigail Mack, Nicolette Shea, Kieran Noir, Joanna Angel. So they do talk to, and there's a few more. So they do talk to girls who are in the industry now to get their point of view, but they're very short snippets of a conversation. They're not really an interview like these ones are. So overall, it's a good show. I would say, as far as the documentary goes, it's average. If you like the subject matter, maybe you're familiar with some of these stars, maybe you saw them at some point in your life, maybe you're interested in what they're doing now, that kind of thing, then you might be interested in this. But overall, I'd say it's probably about a 6 out of 10, just slightly above average because of the content. And one thing to warn you is that because of the subject matter, they do show nudity. They do show scenes from the movies, not XXX rated, but definitely R rated. So keep that in mind when watching it, that you're going to see a lot. That's After Porn Ends 3. So thank you, and have a nice day.